All right, welcome to week 14. This week again, we are talking about the challenges associated with diplomacy, war, and the beginnings of international relations. I think for this week, to me, one of the seminal events in international relations, of course, is the Peace of Westphalia, which is part of three separate kind of sets of treaties. I think the first one was the Treaty of Osnabrück, and then the Peace of Westphalia, which effectively ended the 30 Years' War. So what was the 30 Years' War about? It was basically dealing with kind of the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire. You actually had, remember, because of Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation, you ended up with roughly about half of the Holy Roman Empire being effectively Protestant. And you've got a new Holy Roman Emperor that came in that basically was like, well, you're all going to be Catholic. And that sparked a war that at different points brought other Protestant nations into the war. This was a war fought over 30-something years, and roughly 8 million people died as a result. I mean, we don't think of these early modern wars as being particularly bloody, but this was a bloody war. In the end, and when we talk, about the idea of realpolitik and raison d'etat, one of the things that brought the war to an end was the fact that France entered the war on the side of the Protestant powers, largely because they were fearful. The French and Cardinal Richelieu, who was one of the main foreign ministers, was very fearful of the growing, the realistic prospect that the Habsburgs could unify the Catholic world and end up dominating France as well. And so that's one of the clear instances where you see someone who's ordinary, you would think, ordinary interests would lie on one side, going on the other side because they perceive the threat of one power becoming too great. And that demonstrates something really interesting to me about the challenges associated with diplomacy and war, and the fact that you live in an international, environment that is effectively anarchic. There is no overarching power to tell a state how to behave. And what's really significant about the Peace of Westphalia is that it's at that point that nation states become the primary unit of international relations, and the papacy and theology in general, theological institutions began to take a back seat, recognizing that they had lost a certain amount of credibility. Okay, so the 30 Years' War is a tremendously significant event for understanding political science and international relations. It also, kind of is an origin point for the very idea of things like the Geneva Convention. Why did people think there are rules governing war? Well, because war got so horrific in that early modern period. And of course, one of the challenges to international relations today is that increasingly things like terrorism, things like civil war, are breaking down the network of rules that had been erected to try and make warfare a little bit more manageable. Now, there are a lot of other issues to talk about this week. Obviously, the events leading up to World War I, the attempt by the League of Nations to outlaw war, the idea of collective security, the failure of that in the outbreak of World War II, and then the attempt by to create the United Nations, and the flaws in the United Nations that have subsequently come to pass. One of the things we discovered early on, of course, the United Nations came into being exactly at the same time that the Cold War came into being, and you had the Soviet Union and the United States on the Security Council, and they were supposed to be the body that decided on what to do to prevent warfare. Well, when you have two sides on they're ideologically diametrically opposed to one another, the natural tendency is to stalemate the Security Council. And so for decades, really, we had a Security Council that was ineffective because of the Cold War. So there are a lot of issues to talk about. I hope that you find this chapter interesting, and I hope there are plenty of things that you want to raise and discuss over the course of the week. So let's have a great week of discussion.